Hey man, if you haven't figured it out, and I know this sounds bad coming from just a regular white guy, but I don't think, Hollywood doesn't really care about minorities. And you would say, no shit, Sherlock, it's a corporation. It's like, yeah, but it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to kind of get the taste for it. Hollywood doesn't care about minorities. It promotes this stuff, this pandering to the left wing and to things that they assume that younger people care about, but I don't think they really care about it. And you say, well, no shit. And it's like, sure, man, sure, but it's like, it's a eureka, but it made more sense whenever I thought about it even more. Let's think about it. If Hollywood really wants to act like it's all progressive by taking a bunch of historically white characters, fairy tales, superheroes, what have you, mythology, all that, and make it black. Now, me, if this happened organically and it happened every now and then just as an artistic experiment, just as something to mix things up a little bit, that he actually was good for the job, and if it wasn't in light of a culture war, and it, like I said, every now and then it was out of artistic stuff and we didn't have a culture war, I wouldn't have thought that much of it. I wouldn't have thought that much of, a half Asian Superman. I wouldn't have thought that much of Kingpin being played by a black guy. I wouldn't have thought that much of, if Tim Burton had made Batman Forever and he had that black guy be Harvey Dent, and if there was like no real agenda, it was just people mixing it up. They weren't part of this cult, and it would be characterized by being the exception to the rule. I wouldn't have minded. I wouldn't have been one of those grumpy old people that wants to see political correctness behind every rock and tree, because that's kind of a form of political correctness of its own. I don't want to be one of these dumb young people, but I also don't want to be one of these miserable old people that are just miserable and mean spirited, and like they threw away all their morals because it's like, you see what happens when you care about people besides corporations? You become an SJW. I don't want to be one of those people either. I'm not a revolutionary or a reactionary. I'm a moralist moderate. But the thing is that Hollywood doesn't really care about black people or gay people or whatever, because if they did, they would have actually given them something that helped them out. Hollywood doesn't help out black people or whatever. Hollywood basically just takes something that white people had, makes it black, and then presents it in a way that gets white people mad. So they don't give anything to black people, they just kick white people in the balls. And I think they're trying to make people like racist against each other. I think that they want to take something that means a lot to people, throw some weird political correctness on it so that it looks like black people asked for it when they didn't. And because black people or brown people or Hispanic people or whatever want more representation, they're going to fight for it, even though it's like really like bad half-eaten leftovers. So the thing is that if they really cared about black people, if Hollywood really cared about black people, they wouldn't just do something that was poorly written and meant to piss people off and get white people and black people fighting on the internet. They would have done some research and they would have said, what would have been some good representation that even white people, that even conservatives would have probably appreciated? Why don't we just do a quick little Google search and start looking up some African fairy tales and mythologies? Why don't we create superheroes based off of those African fairy tales and mythologies? Oh, look, some people already did. Apparently there are a bunch of superheroes based, based on African this, Hispanic that, South American the other. But we didn't want to take time to look it up, even though it's already half written out of us. Even though it's already half written for us. There's so many cool mythologies that I don't know, but I know I don't know, that I would love to see Disney and Marvel create. I know that there's got to be so many things from Africa and South America and certain parts of Asia that we don't know about that ought to be amazing, and they're just waiting for their moment in the sun. There's some fairy tale, some legend. There's a South American, a Brazilian mermaid story that's just similar enough to The Little Mermaid that we would kind of be pulled in, but it's so much more different and unique once you actually hear the details. I mean, this is a freshwater mermaid from South America with a different story. So there's your representation there. South American Brazilian mermaid. You know, she's in freshwater. She's South American. And the thing is that the fact that it's a mermaid makes it just similar enough to The Little Mermaid, but it's a totally different story when you get into it. So it'd be like the difference between the Justice League and the Watchmen, or the Justice League and Invincible. You can tell it has parallels, but it's definitely its own thing. I'm sure there's so many myths about Anasazi and so much stuff. In a roundabout way, one thing that Netflix made that may not have had the best production values, but it didn't get nearly the marketing it could have gotten, even though it had like the voices of Mark Hamill and Keith Davids, was Kulapari Army of Frogs. Kulapari Army of Frogs is an example of, hey guys, you're sitting on a gold mine. Here's a frog. Here's this thing where it's like these frogs whose culture seems to be based off of, African jungle tribal culture. And they're in a world of mythology that's based off of indigenous Australian mythology. So there's two cultures there. And you've got Mark Hamill in it, and you've got Keith David in it. And it's not the best, animated thing. And it is technically for children. But that's a step in that direction. And it was written by a black man. It was written by a black man who was a football player. And he was watching documentaries on frogs. And he was inspired by Lord of the Rings and 300. And that's what made this story. And it's like, if you like Lord of the Rings or Redwall, Kulapari Army of Frogs might be a good little show to watch with your kids. Or with your adult. I watch it with my adult friend, my roommate, we watch it as a part of Keith David blog. We were watching Gargoyle, Spawn, and Kulapari because Keith David had pivotal roles in them. Keith David's cool, man. But anyway, the thing is that why there's so much stuff that they have, but it's obvious that they don't want to utilize it. Hollywood doesn't want to make good African, South American, Southeast Asian characters. They are creatively bankrupt, yes, but they have an agenda. And the thing is that you might think, oh, it's the woke agenda, it's the left agenda. Maybe Hollywood is technically its own version of woke and left, but they are not the friends of millennials. They are not the friends of true social activists. They are not the friends of people who are like a more sane version of left, or people who are mislabeled left just because they say a couple things that parallel what the left says, but it's not. The deep state has not been infiltrated by the left. The deep state infiltrates both the right and the left, and it plays favorites because it wants to drop you like a bad habit once you realize you're being used by them, and then offer you up as a sacrificial lamb once they've gotten all they want out of you. So the same people who might have misled baby boomers and the MAGA hat Trump supporters are ultimately in the same tent as the same people who lead astray the SJW's woke Twitterati. And that whole thing has basically been to balkanize truther circles, the people who are true woke, but they avoided being red-pilled MAGA woke. They avoided being blue-pilled Holly woke, Twitterati, political correctness, cancel culture, cultural Marxism woke. They avoided those extremes because, the alternative right and the alternative left were trying to break away from the mainstream. But the state likes to infiltrate opposition and turn it into a controlled opposition proxy army. If it leans right, they're going to infiltrate it with Nazis and racists. If it leans left, they're going to infiltrate it with Marxists. If it's somewhere in between that they can't really pin it on, they're going to fill it with like some kind of religious fundamentalist group, or some kind of flat earther thing, or just anything that will start screaming and the camera can zoom in on, and then they will associate it with you so that they can sink your ship by the weight that they bring to this ship. So I just want you to know that Hollywood does not really care about black people. I could go into certain conspiracy theories that would probably get this video demonetized, but I don't have to do that. I'm kind of hoping that if we can't take down Hollywood for the horrible amount of literal skeletons it has in its closet, the horrible amount of stuff where, where basically Hollywood is run by people who are basically like if the Sith took over Hogwarts and they saw themselves as a society of evil sorcerers. Doesn't mean you got to believe in their dark magic, but they believe in their dark magic and they will act accordingly. And quite frankly, even if their dark magic doesn't exist, their tricks do, and they've been quite effective, but we're waking up. But the thing is, it would be like if I was trying to get Al Capone on all the murder, but I can't catch him on murder, but we finally got him on taxes. We tried to catch this president of a dictatorship in the Middle East for genocide that he's doing, but then the only way that he gets in trouble is for corruption charges about miscounting votes or some junk. So it's kind of sad because it's not the ideal way that we take them down. We've been trying to directly attack bad people for the horrible things that they do, but then they just find a way to censor us or to send bad apples to make us look stupid. But then the thing is that eventually they're going to slip up. And it might be that we'll have the tiniest chink in their armor through something about taxes or whatever. So as much as, we might like to slam Hollywood, it seems that what's going to destroy them is them collapsing under their own weight and people being so disgusted by Hollywood that they tune out of Hollywood, and like Britain, they start having colonies that break away and have their own American Revolution. Or like the Soviet Union, once they realize that the central power is down, you have a bunch of rebellions and uprisings by the individual republics that were part of the Soviet Union. And I feel that that's what's going to happen with the internet and the indie creative team. That's why Hollywood and big tech and corporations and banks and the government are trying to monopolize and centralize everything so that there's no alternatives that they don't directly control. Because once you become part of a group, they have a way of infiltrating it and controlling it. But whenever we know how to be dispersed and decentralized, yet on the same page, without being too easily interconnected, that is actually our strength. It used to be that unity was our strength. Well, unity in spirit is our strength. Unity in spirit in being on the same page, but not in a way that they can control us with our emotions or with brainwashing. So just to sum up that point, Hollywood does not care about black people or gay people. There's a lot of skeletons, literal and figurative, in their closet that shows how they've done them wrong. They just want to do something that's going to kick white people in the balls and make white people want to hate black people more. And they're going to do things that make it to where black people are desperate, and they feel that the only way that they can get representation is through a recolored Princess Peach or Little Mermaid. And the thing is, it's not so much that black people are wrong for wanting that, but I actually think black people and minorities deserve better. I think the world deserves better, because if they bring about all of these fairy tales and stuff that they've had for the long time sitting on the back burner that have never gotten the light of day, it's going to be so much better for society. It's going to be better for me, because not only will it make them look good because they have their fairy tales and superheroes, many of them already out there and half written. But not only would it make them look good by putting that on the map, it would also help the rest of us, because we would learn culture. We would learn African fairy tales, Asian mythologies, South American stories, some of it based on fiction and some of it based on actual history. And that could be an inspiration for us. But the media doesn't want us inspired. The media doesn't want us respecting each other. The media is part of that dictatorial control of artificial scarcity, so that the people up top, they literally want us to be scarce in resources. Even though there's plenty to go around, they want us fighting over scraps, because then, one, they can hog the rest of it, but two, they'll keep us fighting each other and not them. There's plenty of stuff for to go around to represent African culture, Asian culture, whatnot, and it's not the average white consumer's fault that it's not out there. It's not necessarily the average, black person's fault either. It's neither of our faults, really. It may be our responsibility to do something with it, but we got to be more compassionate and understanding. We need to be more compassionate to each other, more motivated to ourselves in a tough love way. But if there's resentment or disdain, it needs to be punching up instead of down. Because we are at a crossroads now, and we have to realize that whenever Hollywood does something that's just a middle finger to anybody who likes Star Wars, or just a middle finger to anybody who likes, old Marvel or DC or whatever. One, they're doing it to get us fighting over a piece of shit, because they're going to make something, it's going to be a piece of shit, but then they say, well, you're not going to get any black representation or gay representation this way, so then the blacks or gays or whatever are going to fight tooth and nail, because that's all that they've got. Not all that they've got, but that's all that Hollywood is allowing them to have. And then that makes us resent it, because then they took something that we like, they twisted it, they blackwashed it, they basically put blackface on it and said, here you go, black people, this is all you have, fight white people over these leftovers that we put shit on. And it wasn't shit because it was blackwashed, it was just shit to start with, but they blackwashed it or they color washed it, and so that if you don't like it, you're automatically accused of being a racist. I think that we all deserve better, that it would behoove everybody to meet some really good, well done, Middle Eastern fairy tales, African fairy tales, and all that, and it's there, and some of it's half written. And just to tie it up, one more example. Star Wars is talking about how, like Disney is talking about how Star Wars needs more women. Well, there were so many strong female leads in Star Wars. There's still some in the Disney canon before Disney took over, but there were so many strong female leads in Star Wars and EU Legends. Mara Jade was a favorite, and there were strong female characters of all races, including space aliens, that were there. But they took it away because they don't want you to have what they're saying. They want you to fight over scraps. Okay? And I think the reason why they want you to fight over scraps is because, one, we're divided. The government likes it that we're divided and fighting each other instead of fighting the elites in charge. Two, it's distracting us from what the government might be doing. Who are we bombing? Which of our allies is committing genocide? What draconian law are they passing? How are they going to burn up the Constitution next? Who are they going to step on next? How are they going to, are they selling a lot of our jobs overseas? Who exactly are we bombing again? I know we're bombing somebody, but who are we bombing? That's also what they're trying to distract us from. And that way they don't have to work hard. They just have to take something that's already been done, make a copy of it, and color wash it, and then people will either hate watch it to make a point, or people will watch it to support it because they feel that that's the only scraps that they're giving. And it's Hollywood's fault for starving us, all of us, of magnificent works of art based off of foreign cultures. That's why a lot of people are going to anime, because it does everything Hollywood offers without the hate mail, without the middle finger. It's disturbing at times, and it's an acquired taste. But it seems to be done in a way that is wholesome. And I don't mean just respecting the fan base. I mean giving them something that they need, even if they didn't know they needed it, even if they don't always want it, which is something that has positive values. But Hollywood doesn't want positive values. It wants us to fight each other. It's not the fault of the left or the right as we understand it. They want you, if they screw over something out of political correctness, they want the right to think that the left wing is the deep state when that's not the case. And then while the right wing is thinking that the deep state is nothing but left, they don't realize that they've been infiltrated by the deep state too.